Thanks for joining me on Survival Tips Tuesday. This is the Art of Prepping. I want to welcome all the new subscribers and everyone that follows my channel. I appreciate it very much. So the question today is, if you're lost in the woods, what do you do? This is a question that we've kind of gone over just a little bit in the past. And there's ongoing questions about this, and hopefully I'll be able to fully answer it in this particular episode. Some of the best ways to deal with getting lost in the woods happen before you even get lost. What we can do here is that there's three main things you want to do before you go out. And this is especially true if you're doing a solo hike, backpacking by yourself, or just going out for a nature walk. Even if you just think it's going to be just a few hours, it can literally turn into a few days just because you get turned around or maybe you get injured. And so you have to be ready and at the ready for unexpected emergencies and things that are beyond your forethought. So before you go into the woods, you can do these three things. The first one is tell at least two people where you are going, what you're doing there, and when you should get back. And if you're not back at a certain time, they should contact the park ranger, the forest ranger, whatever you're at. If there is no ranger, they should contact local law enforcement to do a search and rescue. Most likely, though, if it's too late in the day, they may wait until the next day to do that search. It just depends on the size and capability of the department and the search and rescue team. Sometimes you have to actually be missing for more than so many hours. So if just because you're not back at that time, they may not respond because maybe there's a certain type of a requirement of maybe 24 or 48 hours that you're missing before they'll even do that. So you want to look into that and just to see how much time that you would have to survive on your own before they even start looking for you. So it's best to to actually have the capabilities to weather at least a couple of days, in the worst case scenario. So the second thing you can do before you go out is to study the map of the area beforehand. And it helps to identify directions to populated centers or rescue sites, basically to familiarize. So, for example, if you know that the actual the path or the trailhead is in the northern area, and you're traveling southbound, and it's a pretty straight stretch south. It's almost straight down, and then you come back up. It's one of those loop trails. And for some reason you get off the trail because you were looking at something, you saw some wildlife, and before you know it, you got turned around, and you're now walking, and you by accident left the trail, and you've moved quite a bit away, maybe a mile away from your trail. At least you know that if you move north, you'll be a lot closer to your origination point. So knowing your map, and this also has to do with having three means to orient yourself to what direction that was. For example, if it is north that you need to go because that's where you started, then having a GPS, a compass, or one of these three in particular would be very helpful. To know how to use your analog watch and the sun. For example, you take the hour hand if you're in the northern hemisphere and you put it on the sun. In between the sun, where that is, at the hour hand, and where the 12 o'clock position, that's going to be your southern point. And on the other side of the dial is going to be the north. So, for example, if you're in the northern hemisphere and the sun is at the 3 o'clock position, at the 1:30 mark on the actual clock there, it's going to be pointing toward the actual south. And on the other side of the dial, which would be on the directly, just take a line and dissect the watch on the other side. And what you would get is it'll be at 7:30 would be the side that would be pointing north. So that's the direction you would go in. You can also use the stick shadow method. Definitely want to research that. I'm not going to explain that right here. It just takes a little too many minutes to talk about that. And then also I'd be able to identify at night if you did have to camp out, do an overnighter to know where in the northern hemisphere the North Star or Polaris is, and if you're in the southern hemisphere to know where the Southern Cross is, also known as Crux. So the whole thing here is to have multiple redundancies to know about direction, to know where you are relative to other things, and to have the alternative means to to identify these resources by having the knowledge to do such. The third thing you should do before you go out is to have safety equipment. And that could be your first aid or maybe a sidearm if that's allowed in that area. Communication options, maybe have at least one other option beside a cell phone, because as we all know, most areas in forest areas, especially because they're removed from population centers, there's no cell tower. Cell towers typically only have maybe at the most a 3 to 5 mile range for the most part, and so if you are beyond that, you may not have any coverage, especially if you're under a lot of dense canopy of trees and there's a lot of terrain. You may not be able to get a signal even if there's a tower within a few miles. So don't rely on your cell phone. So this is a little tricky though. What would you bring? It could be a two-way radio that maybe has the capability of reaching further out to people that you know that live in the area that you could call for help on. And that's something that you're going to have to investigate further in your area. What kind of radio system would work for your situation? People who climb mountains would have probably a different type of radio system than someone that is going to be in a low valley or in more of a dense terrain. So you have the next thing would be signal devices within your this safety kit, and the signal devices are going to be critical if you have to try to develop a rescue plan. And so just some examples of signal devices. You don't need them all, but maybe at least a couple of them would be pretty helpful. Of course, a signal whistle, and get a decent one. Don't just get a little plastic cheesy little whistle, that's for like 50 cents at a hardware store. No name, little Acme type brands that are just fairly cheesy. You want to get something that's actually really decent, like a storm whistle or a windstorm whistle. Those are very excellent. Even the majority of the Fox 40 whistles are pretty good too. So you got that. Signal flag, flares, pin flares. You could do that. Signal mirrors, transponder beacon, especially if you're going to go way out into the wilderness. Maybe you're doing like a week-long backpacking trip. It wouldn't be the worst thing to make a small investment and get a transponder. Yes, they are kind of expensive, but we are talking about your life here, especially if you're bringing other people with you, like your family, and there's obviously no way in the world that you're going to have any capabilities with your cell phone. And even a more expensive option would be maybe like a satellite phone, but for most people that's totally out of the question. The next thing would be like a strobe light, and you could also do things on your own, like create things in 3, such as large X's, 3 large X's in debris fields in open areas in high contrast, and as well as 3 signal fires and so forth. Now, and let's get back to what the actual situation. Now, those are the things you should do beforehand. These are the things you would do when you're in the situation. And this is a stop. You have to stop. If you're lost and you really feel like you're lost, quit getting deeper and deeper into your lostness, if you will. So you want to stop, calm down, sit down and relax if you have to. And I do that for at least 10 to 20 minutes. Kind of, reduce your breathing, reduce your blood pressure, and just chill. You'll start to think a lot clearer, and you'll get out of that panic mode a lot faster. And when you're doing this, replay how you got to where you were. Sometimes you can actually retrace back and get out and find the trail. A lot of people do this. But if you're really deep in the woods and you went off the trail that far and you're that turned around and you can't really get a bearing because there's too much of a canopy above you for what direction you're at and where the sun is particularly, you may actually have to just sit there and just try to replay it in your head. If this doesn't work, try to write out a map of how you think you got there. Sometimes visually you might be able to recall memories faster and better. If that doesn't work, then you want to go ahead and write whatever information you can remember that you know is factual down so that you will remember it and you'll have a document of that. And so it's because when things are fresh on your mind, that's one thing. But after, an hour or two, you'll start to second guess yourself. And if you don't have things written down, you may confuse yourself and mix yourself up with information that wasn't even valid and factual. If you're not able to retrace your path, and if you are injured, for example, you may want to have to stay where you're at. If you can get to a more open area so it's easier for people to spot you from above, especially for rescue crews, then do that if it's safe to do that. But otherwise, stay where you're at. At this point, you'd want to do an inventory of your supplies, especially to check what your capabilities are with your shelter, fire, water, protection, food, and signaling. So if you have more than those kind of categories, that's good. Just do a whole inventory. This will kind of distract you a little bit and get you a little bit more focused on your capabilities instead of your hopelessness and lack of ability to control your situation. The next thing is to call for help at this point. If you're really thinking, okay, there is no other option, besides your cell phone, if you have another radio system of some sort or communication device, use it. At this point, though, if you can't get a signal or no response, which is very plausible, and you don't have a transponder and you don't maybe have a satellite phone or whatever else that's actually would be useful in that area, then you're going to actually have to basically figure out a plan at how you're going to deal with this. Once again, if you're injured, you want to go ahead and just create your own base camp right then and there. You're not going to be wanting to try to wander around or crawl around. If you broke a leg, for example, you'd want to stabilize yourself the best you can, give yourself the first aid you can give yourself, and try to settle and stabilize. And if all you can do is make a very rudimentary debris shelter to get into in a campfire, then do that. But if you can travel and move about and you're not injured and you have energy and you're not dehydrated and all this, what you want to do is move to the highest elevation point with the clearing. So you can look out and to see if you can see any signs for human activity, any type of population center. Maybe you can find another trail that or maybe you can see your trail, or maybe you're not that far away as you thought you were. Because a lot of times what happens when you're lost, you tend to walk in circles. It's somewhat of a large circle, but people, when they walk, typically are not really walking as straight as you think you are. So some people walk to the left, some people walk to the right. It's very incremental, but a lot of times people just walk in the same circle, and that's what you might have been doing. So you may not have gotten that far really off the trail. Now, in terms of looking for people, if you can't find anybody or any kind of indication of any type of human activity from that higher advantage point of elevation, you want to look down to the lower elevations and try to see where we would be the best and highest probability for water. Now, when you're up there still, you want to look around maybe to see if there's any other better shelter options or locations for shelter, and to see if there's any other better open areas to maybe put signals if you're going to stay there and wait for rescue. Maybe like we talked about, having signal fires, or maybe just an area that you can put some debris into symbols like X's. Now, if you're not going to stay there and you want to leave the area, then you want to go ahead and start heading down, especially if you have enough time and light to do that. If it's starting to get dark, go ahead and make shelter. You don't get caught off guard in the middle of an unknown area in the middle of the dark, trying to put up shelter or trying to move about. You can be injured very greatly. Even if you have a headlamp, moving about at night, though, still increases your chance for injury, and you're not going to be as able to fend off predators if you have those in your areas. And also to be aware of like snakes and other things. So in this last section that we're talking about going to your lowest elevation, when you're down there at the lowest elevation and you do find a body of water or a stream or a creek, follow that in the direction that you, with the previous techniques talked about earlier, to where you think is going to be probably the highest likelihood of being in a populated area or getting back to your origination point. And this is going to help. And this is going to really help give you a little bit of a motivation and goal, since now you have a means to actually be more proactive and control your environment by having a plan and moving towards something instead of being stationary and feeling helpless. So you follow this, and most likely you'll be just fine. In some cases, though, that if this water source starts to veer off and go way away from your direction, for example, if you're going north and it starts to cut east real sharp, then you may want to go ahead and try to stay with the north bearing. But most water sources end up at least near or through a population center, and depending on how far you are into the woods, of course. But these are just things and tips to acknowledge and to just to consider. This isn't, of course, like every possible idea out there to deal with this situation of being lost, but it is a primer point to begin and to consider how to overcome it, Most of this is going to be psychological and just being aware of where you're at. And if you are going to go off a trail to investigate or explore an area, use trail markers or even draw a map so you can retrace yourself. So the vast majority of people, I say well over 90% with the information I just gave you, can actually at least procure their own rescue or to signal a rescue with these different means. It is super critical, though, to tell other people before you leave, though, where you're going. And these have to be reliable people, not people that are kind of unreliable and in their own world. They need to be people that are going to be like, okay, little Tommy didn't come back at 6 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock now, and so I'm calling the authorities, and we're going to get some help out there. So, being lost can be real panicky, and just remember though, you can calm yourself down. There's no help in being upset or panicked. It doesn't get you anywhere. It'll be a natural response for most people though to get a little bit upset about it being lost. But just remember, though, it doesn't help your self-rescue or to be rescued by others. So don't let fear and emotion cloud your mind. Just like we talk about a lot of people who, that look at things politically. They let their emotions, dictate their actions. And this is just another example of things not to do, especially when you're in survival situations and in daily life. You don't want your emotions to override logic and rational thinking because a lot of times, just because our body reacts to something doesn't mean that it's based on facts and reality. Because there's a lot of things in life that have happened to us, and our body is always trying to mitigate more suffering and hardship, so it may overreact to try to keep yourself from having to experience that again. So anyways, I hope this helps you a lot. Hey, thanks again for joining me on Survival Tips Tuesday. I look forward to talking to you all very soon, and I'll catch you later.